What's up guys, it's Eric and Tank from Verus Engineering, and on today's how-to video we install some lowering springs and camber plates on our shop 987.2.
So we're going to start by removing a bunch of small bolts. That's going to allow us to, we have to spring this open first and then remove that and then take off the bolt, remove the plugs. We're going to end up removing the caliper, which uses I think a T55 or T60 Torx, two of those. We're going to remove the bracket for the brake line. We have to remove this bolt on the strut. It's hard to see because it's dark. I believe that's an 18 millimeter, so that we can remove the strut. And then we're gonna have to do the 3 bolts or 3 nuts on the top of the car to then allow this to come out. All right, we're now looking at the top of the strut. There's 3 bolts here, which actually allow you to adjust camber in the factory setting, if you are wondering. But we're gonna remove those 3 bolts, or nuts, and then we'll be able to hopefully remove the strut from the car so that we can change the springs and add camber plates. Alright, so something else we have to do before we can actually get the strut out. So it's actually loose right now. But we're going to have to compress the spring so that we can actually swing this entire thing out here so that we can actually pull it out of the knuckle, because it actually goes down in the knuckle very far. So we actually have to pull it out. So to do so, we have to compress this to get it under the fender and pulled out.
So at this point we have compressed the spring a little bit with the spring compressor. Yes, this is sketchy. Yes, be careful. But basically we're going to now remove the brake caliper, push this down as hard as we can, and then pull it out and hopefully not ding the fender. That's the goal, at least. It's definitely helpful to have somebody helping you. Let's see if we can do it. And then it's out. So with it out, let's see here. With it out, we can now just pull this out, just with a bunch of back and forth basically, and pulling, and it should come out. Oh my gosh. There we go. Woo. Sweet. This is how I fastened it for the time being, so that we can work on the shocks and not have everything dangle. Basically just looped a strap to the chassis, holds up the arm pretty well. Alright, so with the spring compressor still on, we will remove the top hat from the damper assembly. Keep in mind that there are pieces that go specifically in specific locations. So this goes on the top with the nut on like so, and then this actually went on the shaft. We'll be replacing this with camber plates. And then something specific to notice is that there's this washer, beveled washer, that goes onto the shaft with this facing downward. So we'll have to reinstall all that stuff during assembly. So currently we have a bare damper. We're gonna throw on the OEM dust boot with the bump stop right there. Shove that on. The beveled washer, bevel side down. The, I don't know what you wanna call this, but this thing. And then the spring will go on, and we've already put on the spring compressor. You can see that, so that the spring is compressed some. We have our OEM radial bearing. We're gonna clean this part up real quick so that it sits in the camber plate a little nicer, because the camber plate actually rides on this location. Just use a screwdriver, and then we're going to put on the camber plate with the OEM nut. It's a little bit more clean, so we're going to install it. You can see where the spring used to ride, so I try and line that up again like so, and then we'll put the camber plate on. I have Jose here who's going to help me as I push down the spring further with the camber plate on to get the nut on, hopefully.
Check if it's enough. Check if it's enough.
Cool. All right, so now we have the camber plate installed. You can use a torque wrench and an Allen wrench to check that torque spec, but generally speaking, an electric or an air impact is the easiest way to get that on. You can tell when it's fully tight. The entire unit kind of just cinches up. Now we're going to work on getting the clamps off so that we can put it back on car. So I have Jose here. We're basically going to pull this like we did before so that we can install the damper, and then we're going to push down as hard as we can and then swing it in and install it up top. This is definitely one of the harder parts of the install. The nuts are installed on the top, and if we go beneath, down here, the damper is installed. We'll install the brakes, we'll install a few other bolts, and then we have quite a bit, let's see if we can get it a little brighter. We have quite a bit of camber adjustment now, so that's good.
All right, so similar to the front, we're gonna have to remove some 10 millimeters. We're gonna have to remove the sway bar mount, which goes through, which holds the strut on. That's an 18 millimeter. And then we have to remove the brake caliper again. The brake caliper is a T55. We're also gonna have to remove the axle. We're gonna have to remove the lower control arm. So we're gonna take off the camber adjuster, and then we're gonna have to remove the rear toe link, and instead of removing it at the knuckle, I'm gonna remove it at the adjustment point, because I know that we have to do a suspension alignment anyway. And then I believe we have to take out the traction bar, and then finally the knuckle can again pull out from the fender. So let's get to it.
It's hard to see, but currently what we're doing is we're removing the 10 millimeter triple square bolts from the axle so that the axle can be removed. Well, not fully removed, but just loose, so then we can get the suspension out. And then basically we'll get into the inside, remove those bolts or nuts, and the suspension member should come out. I am using an impact to remove these because it's easier than doing it manually, as you'll see. Now there are 6 bolts. I already had removed 2 before I started the video. They look like this, with a little connector for both. And the axle is now free so that the suspension can move and we can drop the suspension out. Alright, so moving to the rear, we need to remove all of this and that to get to the shock tower, the upper shock tower for the rear. On this side I've already done that. Remove quite a few panels, some carpeting. You have to remove this centerpiece. That's open for the air intake. Normally there will be a silver thing right there, or you can probably leave the carpeting there actually for this specific install. I don't know because I pulled it all out together. But basically you need to pull all that out so that we can get to the bolts right here. And then we can work on the suspension and getting that fully out. All right, right now we have the tow arm disconnected, we have the half shaft disconnected, lower control arm disconnected, we have the traction bar disconnected. We have the, oh, that's super dark. There we go. We have the coilover disconnected from the chassis. We're gonna pull off the brake caliper and then pull everything out, down, and then that flops out, and then we can pull it out of the knuckle. We're on to the rear shock and damper. Basically, we're gonna have to compress the spring a bit so that we can take off the top hat and then replace the spring. Gonna use some spring compressors, and we'll do that real quick. Use the electric impact again to remove this top nut. You can tell that it's loose because everything's kind of moving around. So the spring's not in tension with the top hat. And then just remember how everything came off, and we'll put it back on together with the aftermarket springs. All right, so we have the new spring on. We're gonna put this on so that the spring goes in the same location that it did with the OEM spring. This rotates. Sorry, wrong way. Actually goes this way. And the top hat goes on. And the only thing that I've noticed is that these locations only go on this plastic piece one way. So you have to make sure that these studs, the pressed-in studs on the top hat, go on in these cutouts, otherwise something probably won't go together correctly, make some noise, something of that nature. Now it's basically on all those 3 points. Put on the other washer. And then we don't need to compress the spring at all because it's a lowering spring. And currently I'm not actually going to tighten this because I know that this needs to be clocked in the knuckle a specific way, and then these 3 bolt studs need to go in the chassis a specific way. So currently it rotates really easily. If I tighten this, it will not rotate easily. I believe though it's going to have to, basically one of these studs, this stud, the one that's furthest down, this is not actually flat, but anyways, this stud is going to need to be in line with that, so I'm going to start it there, and then we'll assemble it and fully tighten that nut in car to ensure that it goes together smoothly. Alright, so this is what I found out on the other side. So I installed the damper in the chassis, loose, the bolts are just, or the nuts are just there. The tab is on the back right here. And then I let everything down. The brake caliper is loose. And then basically you just bring this guy down a little bit further, and it's heavy. Like this assembly is really heavy. But you bring it down a bit more, and then you slide it in. All right, so I ended up tightening the nuts up top, which helped stabilize this a bit. And then I was able to push the knuckle up on there. And then once you get this sway bar link through it, it holds it up, and then we can fashion the rest of the suspension bits on. I need to make sure that everything fits on still, but Fingers crossed it all does. Let's see if it goes together. All right, so I was able to get the damper in the knuckle, and then basically while I pulled everything out, I was able to get the toe arm, the axle where it's supposed to be, and then the lower control arm where it's supposed to be. The caliper is back on as it needs to be. And then up top, we were able to tighten the 21 millimeter nut with an extension. So an extension, it kind of just barely comes up right here. You tighten that with an impact, and then these are still loose so that this could move. To get an impact on that, we had to pull on the bottom side the knuckle outward so that it kind of came up a little bit more like this, so you can get a socket on there. Hope that helps. All right, thanks for watching our how-to on the springs. I know it was a little difficult, but hopefully you get through it, and hopefully this helps you a little bit. Stay subscribed if you're interested in any more of our how-tos on the 987.2. And thanks for watching.